Welcome. I'm about to show you the most important viz of your life. Are you ready? Nervous? No? How about now? Still not. Now? Okay, I think I need to put in the title. Distance of giant falling meteor from where we are right now. All right, so what do we notice? Just a few seconds ago, you guys were probably thinking, what is this guy talking about? But now we're all ready to phone home to our loved ones. That is the power of text. My name is Kelvin, and I'm a software engineer on the formatting team at Tableau. And for the past 3 years, I've been heavily involved in the features of our product that allow you to customize and beautify your vizzes, including rich text. And this is Robert Casara. He's a senior research scientist at Tableau doing research on how we use data and visualizations to present, communicate, and tell stories. And together, we want to help you make your audience care about your vizzes by using text to provide context.
And the masters of providing context are the data journalists. And I've been following their work and cribbing ideas from them for a number of years now. In particular, some of these you might recognize, of course, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Upshot, which is part of the New York Times, but they also do a lot of separate good work, the Guardian. And these are all very much serious news. And then if you're looking for something a bit more lighthearted, perhaps something a bit more fun, you might want to check out The Pudding, which is a very interesting, much more recent publication that does a lot of work that's, well, some of which is quite serious, but done in a more lighthearted way, and some of it is a little bit less serious. Let's look at a particular example here. This is one of my favorite news graphics, and it's been around for a while. This is from 2012. Hannah Fairfield did this for the New York Times in 2012, and it's called Driving Safety in Fits and Starts. To briefly walk you through what this is called a connected scatterplot, which means that it's a scatterplot where we draw a line through the years, through the points. Each point is a year in temporal order. So the axes of this scatterplot here are the vertical axis is the number of car fatalities in the US normalized by 100,000 population, and the horizontal axis is the number of miles driven in the US as a total. And again, every point here is 1 year of data. It starts in 1950, and the actual data goes until 2011, I believe. What's interesting about this chart type, which is of course unusual, is that it has this very interesting shape. And it tends to get people more interested in it, and you kind of want to follow it. It's a bit like a road trip through the data. You can like follow the line and figure out, well, why is it changing direction here? Why is it going left suddenly, or why is it dropping? And there are also some unusual features here. In particular, this loop here, which of course you could never get in a line chart if there's a temporal axis, but time here goes along the line. So a loop can actually happen here when the two values that are changing over time change in a particular way, and there's a lag between those changes. And the whole thing makes for a very nice, very pleasing full-page layout. But what's interesting here is also that there is a lot of annotation to it. In fact, the editor of the Upshot, Amanda Cox, likes to talk about the annotation layer, which is what sets journalism apart from data analysis. And it's perhaps the easiest to see, and because it's kind of hard to appreciate really how much there is. So if I take all of that away, you can see that now we just have a chart, we just have a viz, and all the information that was there before, all the little annotations that told you about what was happening at different times, or what the data was even about, or how to read it, it's all gone. In fact, it kind of looks a bit like that meteor chart you just saw earlier. And in Tableau terms, we would call these things labels, or annotations, or axis labels, or titles, or text zones. That's what we're going to show you. That's at least what I'm going to show you a little bit now. We're going to build this, or something somewhat similar in Tableau. All right. So I have a data set here that is from the NHTSA, that is the National Highway and Transportation Safety Administration. And it has basically the same kinds of data you just saw. So I have fatalities here. I made a calc, fatalities per 100,000 population. And we have miles traveled here as well. We have a little convention here where every calc is going to start with an exclamation point, so it's easier to see that that is a calc. I'm going to just walk you through this very briefly just to show you how to build this chart. It's very simple really, but if you haven't seen this before, it's may seem a bit unusual. So I'm going to make a scatterplot here in a moment. And I'm going to break this down by year. So I'm putting the number of fatalities on the vertical axis, number of miles traveled on the horizontal axis, and I'm dropping the year on detail here. That gives us a scatter plot. I'm going to make a quick change here. Tableau likes to include the 0 on the axis. I'm going to turn this off just because I want a bit more space here. And I should also maybe stress that this is for presentation. So some of the rules that you may have heard about 0 axis, yes or no, or 0 on the axis, yes or no, they can be stretched a little bit more when it's about presentation versus analysis. All right, so now we have a scatter plot. How do we make this a connected scatter plot? We switch the mark type from automatic to line, and voila, we have a line. It's a bit weird looking, but that's because what Tableau does here is it draws the line in the order in which the data comes back from the database. So I'm going to take the year, and I'm going to drop it on this little path field that we have in the marks card that only shows up when you have a line. So now the order of the points, the order in which we draw the lines rather, is the number is the years, so it's in temporal order. And but now you can see that there's a pattern or a shape. It looks a bit like the one before, but it's a bit different. So why might this be? Well, let's look at what data we even have here. And this is where I'm going to start showing you some of these text features, in this case the label. So I'm going to take the year and drop it on the label on the marks card, and that's going to label every point we have. And that's fine, but it's kind of busy, so maybe I don't want that. I can click on this field too, and I have a number of options. I can change the formatting, perhaps I want to change the size of the text, or even what's going on in there, also fonts and so on. And then down here, I have this area where I can pick where the labels go. So I could say I label everything like I'm doing right now. I could only label the min-max, which is useful for like a line chart or a bar chart. I can do selected or highlighted, which is useful for interaction on the dashboard. But in this case, I'm just going to label the line ends. And that way I get just 2 labels at the beginning and the end, so 1994 and 2017. So now you can see where I have data. But I also want to label certain points that are of interest to me. So there is a time here where there wasn't a whole lot of change in the number of fatalities, which is the vertical axis, but then there's a sudden drop. So this here is of interest to me. And what I can do here is I can switch on or off individual labels. So here in the menu, there is the mark label, and I can keep that on automatic, which means this label is going to behave like every other label. It's then controlled by that switch you just saw in the marks card. But I can also say always show. And now I always see this label. And I can do the same thing here, perhaps down here, because this point is obviously of interest. I do the same thing. And it's interesting that this feature, as simple as it may be, is actually not even necessarily all that widely known, even within Tableau. So I was surprised that some people didn't even know that was possible. So you're getting the inside scoop here on the features that even the experts don't know about. So I just labeled a few points here that I think are particularly interesting. And that's basically the idea behind a label. So labels are all the same. When I change one label, I change them all, and I can control them all very quickly from one location. Or I can turn them on or off, specifically if I want to just show them in one place or not. And then there's another kind of text feature that is called an annotation. Annotations are a little bit more complicated because there are 3 types of them. So actually, maybe I'll start by first telling you what I'm going to annotate. So I want to annotate this little loop down here. So there's a strange kind of loop that is appearing here where the value changes dramatically between 2011 and 2012. And I can now go in here and say annotate, at which point my menu is going the wrong way. And I can annotate marks, points, or areas. Mark annotations may seem like they're like labels, but I'll show you in a moment why they're different. Points means I can annotate any point on this whole area. It doesn't have to be where a mark is, where data actually lives. I could annotate anything. And an area annotation I'll show you in a moment, which just also goes anywhere I want it to go, but it's for more text. So I'm going to, or for a larger area that can contain a lot more text too. So I'm going to annotate this mark here. And Tableau wants to put some information here, which I will ignore, and I will just say, hey, there's a loop here. And that makes my little annotation down here. I'm going to quickly format this, because I'm going to just get rid of the background, but in particular, I want to change the line. So I'm going to make the line a bit heavier and a bit darker, and I'm going to turn it into an arrow. So there are a bunch of features here where this turns that line here into a little arrow. And you can then move this around and change where it's pointing from and so on to control where this goes. And these annotations are all different. So every annotation has its own text, it has its own anchor that it points to. And then there are area annotations. So area annotations can cover any kind of part of the chart. Like I can just put this here, and they can contain more text. And here I'm going to have to more or less elegantly do some TV magic and copy some text from over here. And you're not supposed to see all these things here. I could put a little annotation here that, for example, explains how to read this chart. And I'm going to just move this over here. That can be text that just helps you read what's happening here. And the thing about area annotations too is I can control where they live, or like how large this little text zone is, how large the entire space is, and position this on this chart, on this worksheet. Oh, I should also have mentioned, we're still on a worksheet. I'm going to get to dashboards in a moment. The final thing I want to talk about briefly here is the title on a worksheet. So every worksheet has a title, and very often it's just like sheet 1 or sheet 79, but title is actually really useful. So it's a good idea to put an actual title here, not just the sheet name, which is a first idea of what it could be, but I could call this driving safety here. And of course I misspelled it, because typing on stage is really hard. All right, so I want to change it. So titles are a very simple text feature, and they're often ignored, but they're actually really powerful, and you should be using them, because the people you give your work to might not know what it's about, and so they want to know, the title is one of the things that tells them that. But let's move on to dashboards. So here's a very simple dashboard that just contains the worksheet that I just made with my little annotation there and my chart. And what I can do on a dashboard is I can add text zones. But this is a floating dashboard, so you see the floating turned on down here. If I drag a text object over here, then I can put text in here. And I'm going to very elegantly go back here to my bit of pre-prepared text here. This is a bit like a cooking show where you want to have things be ready, but of course I now need to resize this a little bit. And I can put text in here, for example, to talk about what happened in 2012. So if you remember, the chart I showed you is from 2012. It has data until 2011. This data goes up to 2017. So now I can actually talk about what happened after that other one ended. And maybe I'll put this over here. So I have controls here where I can move this wherever I want it to go, and then annotate what is on my chart. Now, why would I do that? Why would I use a area annotation versus a text zone? And there's one big difference, and that is when you want to switch to a different kind of layout. So let's say you want to switch to a phone layout. So this is what you do here in the top left. You could change to this layout here, and I'm actually going to go back to the previous one. What happens here is that, actually I might just zoom in here. So this is a preview of what this dashboard would look like on a phone, and you have control over that, so I'll show you in a moment. But what Tableau can do when you have a text zone on a dashboard versus an annotation is it can move that text zone underneath the dashboard or the sheet itself. So it can restructure this automatically and make it much easier and much more readable for your audience than this annotation, because the annotation has to get squished down into the space that we have now, whereas the text zones can be moved, and so there is a lot more flexibility there. And also, once you change this from being locked and automatic to being editable, you can actually go in here and say, yeah, actually, I don't actually want this one in this layout. So you could say remove from phone, so remove it just from this layout, and you can do this for anything. You could do this for tablets, for web views, and so on. And then we won't see it here, but it will still be on the main layout here. So it's still here, but it will not show up on the phone. And so this gives you control over what text features are supposed to appear or not appear. And just to show you this quickly, I'm not going to build the whole thing here, but just to show you what this can look like when it's sort of built out as a full layout that's not quite as pretty as the New York Times version, but at least it's getting there. That has a lot more text and annotations and so on. You can build this kind of thing in Tableau as well. I'm going to show you a second example here that is a somewhat similar chart type, but it uses a number of different features. This is another piece, again, from the New York Times. It's a piece called, "Is There Something Wrong with Democracy?" This is from last year. And it's actually a video that has a bunch of explanation parts, and then it has this very interesting animated scatterplot. It's a bit like what you saw in the keynote in Devs on Stage, and if anybody's familiar with Hans Rosling's TED Talk and Hans Rosling's Gapminder work, you may have seen that kind of thing as well. What they do here is they look at how democratic different countries are. And so they have this axis of undemocratic to democratic, and then they pick out a few countries that are on this sort of democratic end there. And then they pick out a few that are on the other end, that are not nearly as democratic. And then they add a second axis to open this up when they look at rich versus poor countries. But this is wealth versus democracy versus, compared to what Hans Rosling did, which is what he liked to call health versus wealth. So it's a slightly different comparison, but the idea is pretty similar. And what they do here is they then trace some of those countries over time. So you can see who's getting richer but not more democratic, who's getting more democratic but not richer, who's doing both. And so in this case, you see the ones that have been doing well in both directions. You can see countries that were doing better in terms of democracy at some point, but then have dropped back. And then there are countries that have gotten a lot richer, and this is GDP per capita, so this is actual people's wealth, but haven't actually changed much in terms of their democratic development. And again, this is what we do in Tableau here. This would be a label, this would be a trail, and this would actually be an annotation, an area annotation. And I'll show you this, and an axis label here as well. So I'm going to show you these right now. Once we are switched back here. So here I've already built a scatter plot. This is the wealth axis. This is the democracy axis. This is the wealth axis. I've removed the numbers because they're not very meaningful, very useful, especially because I made this a logarithmic axis. But I want to show you when you have an axis that's hard to understand, like this V2X polyarchy axis. This comes from a data set that contains hundreds of measures. And this is basically the main measure, but it's a composite of lots and lots of different things. So if it's, and it just goes from 0 to 1. It's not a meaningful measure like in terms of actually units. So in this case, one thing you can do is you can copy the correct text here and put this in here. And what then happens is that you have these little arrows that tell you which way is better, which way is worse. And the way to do this, these little arrows, actually are pretty easy to find. You can just Google left arrow Unicode or left arrow, and you're going to find those, and you can just copy and paste those into a text field, and it usually works. I'm going to do the same thing here for richer and poorer. And now the countries here all have some information associated with them, but I want to make this more easier to find countries. So I'm going to change the next feature, which is the tooltip. So I'm going to grab the country name here and put this on the tooltip. I should maybe mention, so Tableau makes a tooltip for you where it just puts all the fields. And that's useful for analysis, but for presentation, you want to have something a bit more interesting looking. So I will put this here on the tooltip. Actually, I didn't even need to do that, I guess. Then I can click on the tooltip, and when I do that, I get an editor here, and I can change what the tooltip shows. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually make this very simple. I'm just going to delete everything here except for the country name field, and then just embiggen it, and change the color just because I can. And now I have a much more visible, much more easily readable tooltip. And that way I can easily navigate what's happening here. I also I forgot to mention this is actually on pages. So the pages here let me switch between the years, and the years are also on this area annotation that is here at the bottom, so you can always tell which year I'm on. And there's a history feature, so when I click on one of these countries, and I actually click, there we go, then you can see the trail of where this country came from. And what I will do here now is I will just put these charts on a story. So I don't know if anybody here has used stories, but you can see new story at the bottom there, and that makes a new story sheet for you. And I will take my democracy dashboard. I also put this on the dashboard just to have a bit more control over where this filter lives. And I can now annotate and select things and then capture that state of the dashboard. So for example, I might grab, I don't know, I was going to look for China here and Saudi Arabia because they were also called out in this other chart example, and then I'm going to update my story point here. And now when I make changes, like and I'm going to pick a few of the ones that have done well, Estonia, I don't know, Luxembourg. I can make a new point here, a new story point, and when I switch between them, the story remembers the state. It remembers my annotations. Well, in this case, so far it's only selections, and it can then show me those as I click through the story. And I can add annotations here, or text annotations here as well. So on the bottom left here, there's this little text field, and this is specific to stories. So I can drag this out and put it somewhere, and then say, I don't know, I'm just going to call this stagnant countries. Oh yeah, I cannot type at all. Countries. And I could have made this a bit larger, but I could put this somewhere up here perhaps, and so it's going to be visible. It's going to tell me what this is, and this gets captured automatically. So when I switch between the 2 points, it's just there. And here I could say like countries that have been doing well and so on. So this way I can build up a story that walks you through the same kind of ideas that you just saw in this example, in the New York Times example. So to briefly recap, what I showed you is we have labels in Tableau, we have annotations, we have titles, we have axis labels, text zones on both dashboards and stories, and tooltips. But what if you want to provide context without using text?
Well, Robert, I think I can speak a little bit on that. So, is it switched? Cool. That's not the right one. Let's see here. so I, like Robert, am also didn't. Oh, I have to press it. All right, cool. So I, like Robert, also really enjoy the New York Times. I have this particular viz really interested in me because I'm actually from Pennsylvania, and Westmoreland County in the top right is actually the county I'm from. So this one is on congressional voting in the area around my county, and the first thing I want to point out is that there's already a lot of information on this map, right? Because maps inherently hold a lot of information. So things like shape, location, size, those kind of like attributes that Tableau usually use to denote value in like a scatter plot or any other type of viz is already being taken up by a map just to show the map itself. So really you're only left with like color and maybe some text to be able to describe more information about this map. And you can see here that this map is already doing using color for like more Republican or more Democrat based on how that particular county or precinct voted. So how do you actually add more information? For example, who even were the candidates and who won? Well, this example uses something called a viz and tooltip. And a viz and tooltip is a viz and a tooltip that is actually filtered on the precinct or the mark that you're hovering over. And if you hover over a different mark, it would give you a different viz. And it's actually a really great way to add a lot of context and a lot more information without using just purely text. So let's try to do that in Tableau right now. Okay, so my Tableau didn't resize, so I'm gonna manually do it. Cool. All right, so here's Tableau. And the data source I'm pulling from is the MIT Election Lab, which is a really great website. It's full of CSVs that have all sorts of election data. So if you want lots of light reading to do, you can go through that. Again, all resources, start and end WebExes and data sources, resources that we use otherwise will be available after the conference is over. So I don't live in Pennsylvania anymore. I actually live in Washington. So when I drag state onto the map, you will see that Washington actually appears. And that's not a tribe. And that's because I put a data source level filter on this particular data source. And the reason why I did that is because I want to draw focus into Washington because ultimately the audience of my viz is my friends in Washington. I want them to see exactly all the election results. So what's the point of having all the other states for now, in my particular case? And this is something you need to consider whenever you make your vizzes. What's actually the focus of your viz, and how much background noise can you get rid of? Maybe you also will build one that will use like Illinois or even Pennsylvania, wherever you're from, or a map of the entire United States if you're doing a comparison between states. But for me, I know my audience is my friends in Washington, so we're going to create Washington State. All right. Well, we have the state now. I'm also going to drag district onto detail. And you can see Tableau automatically draws those shapefiles. Tableau has a large collection of pre-made shapefiles, and they're actually just built in directly, so they map the data directly to a shape. Whenever you do this kind of drag, it just builds it out. All you have to do is make sure that the geographic role is correct. This one is congressional district. All right? So to get more like that viz, I'm going to drag this calculation I made called %Republican onto color. And I'm going to edit the colors of this particular, not that. So in America, we have a bipartisan system. We have the Democrats and Republicans, if you're not from the United States. The Democrats are usually represented in blue, and the Republicans are usually represented in red. So I'm going to use this red-blue diverging color palette. And I'm also going to change the start and end to be 0 and 1 to be more absolute. Okay. Now when I hit OK, it starts to look more like that map that we had before. Another thing I want to do is put year on filter because this actually shows a lot of years inside the data source. In particular, 2018, because that's the most recent one, and the one that the viz is showing. All right, so we did everything just to make the map. I think it's time to make the viz in tooltip. So if I go down to this pre-made sheet, the particular viz in tooltip that this viz is showing is, it seems like there's candidates and then the number of votes they had, and also the party that they're part of. So let's build that real quickly. That's not it. So we need candidate. I'm going to drop that on column. I'm also going to draw candidate votes on rows, and that creates a bar chart. And then I'm going to sort because it goes from top down. I'm going to drag party onto color so you can see which candidate's conservative, which one's liberal, or sorry, which one's Republican, which one's Democrat, and which one's independent. And that looks pretty good. We also need to make sure that the year filter is applied properly to that. So it's also using just the 2018 filter year. All right. So as I mentioned, the definition of a viz in tooltip is that it's actually filtered on the mark itself, and that's why I didn't add any additional filters for district, because the viz in tooltip will actually build that for me. Now, if I go back to the map, and I go back to tooltip, which Robert has already demonstrated to us, I can go into the insert menu, and instead of choosing a parameter or any of the other insert menu things, I can go to sheets and click on the viz that we just created. Now, as you can see here, this has some options in it, like width and height, but also a filter. So if you don't want to filter on all the fields, you can specify exactly which ones you want to do. In this case, all filters is pretty good, or all fields is pretty good, so we're going to leave it there. And then I'm also going to put on some good old traditional text on here to make things nice and clear. So I'm going to put district, drop the district field, and say Washington, because we're in Washington. Okay, and now whenever I hover over one of the marks, you can see the viz in tooltip's actually showing. So District 8, we have Kim going against Dino, and Kim won. Now, there's some stuff on here like, that axis is not particularly useful, and also you don't really need to know which one's a candidate, which one's candidate votes, because it's pretty apparent. So you can go back to the viz in tooltip and clean it up a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is drop the exact number of votes onto the viz. So when I go to candidate votes, and I drop that on label, you'll see that it appears on the right. Now, there seems to be something wrong here because I don't think that this candidate had 20 million votes, because Washington doesn't have that many people. And that's because it's using the sum of votes instead of the maximum value. There's multiple in this particular data source. All right? And then also, to make life a little bit easier, we don't really need to know the hundreds place or the tens place. So we can actually format this, format the number to use K to represent 1,000. So we go to custom number formatting. Let me zoom in a little bit. Drop the decimal places, and then move the display units to thousands. And now you can see as it's nicely formatted. I can go and hide the axes. And now when I go back, you can see a nice, clean viz in tooltip showing exactly the information you want. All right, so this is really good and all, and we have our nice viz in tooltip, but honestly, would you actually use this viz? Like, who actually knows which congressional district you're in? Some of you might, but for me and my friends, we really don't. And this is where I want to talk about connection, right? You want to make it as easy as possible to connect with the audience of this viz. Most people don't go around saying, hi, my name is Kelvin. I like swimming and running and reading books, and I'm from Congressional District number 7, Washington, because no one talks like that. Usually they would say something like, I'm from Seattle, Washington. And Just like in Iron Viz, where they're allowed a secondary data source to view the data that they're given through a lens to tell a story, you should be doing the same thing with your vizzes if it needs to be like that. And in this case, I think it does. I think we really need to find a way to relate to our audiences. So to do this, I've already joined this data, as you can see it's an extract, with another CSV or table of just the cities in Washington mapped to their congressional district. So these are all the cities in Washington. I simply just put them on the viz as a city point. And this is a lot better because now you can actually go and try to probably find Washington or Seattle, maybe, somewhere around here. But it's still not too useful. So again, we want to lower the entry of this viz by allowing them to search for where they're from. We can do that with a parameter. So I've already created this hometown parameter down here. It's a string parameter. And when I show it, you can see that it just contains all of the cities in my data source. Now, clicking on this and going down is not that great, so I'm going to quickly go and make it a type in. So now you can go and type in whatever city you're from. So I know a couple of cities in Washington. One of my favorites is Walla Walla. All right, so this isn't really doing anything just yet. What we really wanted to do is in the map, I want to just show that exact city that the hometown parameter is currently showing. And that's actually pretty simple. So over here, we're currently using this city points calculation. Instead, I pre-made this hometown point calculation. And if I show you quickly what it is, it's a very simple calculation. It just checks whether the parameter is your city, and if it is, it makes the point on the map. All right, so I'm going to go and replace my city points with hometown point, and you can see it just points Walla Walla, Washington. Anyone here from Walla Walla? Okay, that's fine. All right, so now we have a city. What we really want to do is to highlight the exact district you're from. Because if you go back to this map, you can see that there are really, really small marks over here. You can't really tell exactly where your city is. So we want a way to highlight just the district that your city is in without having to remove all the districts from the entire view. And in Tableau, there is this wonderful world of sets. And you might have heard of sets before. But they're a very big feature in Tableau. There's entire talks done by them, done of them. And we're not going to dwell too much on all the intricacies of sets because that, it takes a very long time. We're going to use them in a very simple way here. If you're interested in learning more about sets, we can link a few resources in the end or point you to a couple of talks you can watch online. So I've already created a set over here. It's called districts, and I created it on the districts field. And I've showed this set. If I show this set, sorry. Usually in a set, which is like a collection of values, you can manually choose what goes in and out of a set. So it's like a bag, right? It's either in the bag or out of the bag. It's either in districts or out of districts. Well, in our case, we already know exactly which district we want to be in our set. We just want the district that our hometown is in. So instead of using general, I'm going to go to condition, and I'm going to use this formula over here. So this formula is very similar to the hometown points formula, where it's just equating the city field to the hometown field, but it's also aggregating it as a max, so you can know just one value. Okay? Now, whenever I drag this set onto color, you can see it just highlights the district that we care about, which is the one that my hometown is in, Walla Walla. Now, we probably don't really want it to, see them side by side, so we can use a dual axis on this particular graph. To make a dual axis, if you notice at the top, I've duplicated the latitude pill, and then I've done all of the things that we've been doing to our marks card, dragging city onto detail, state onto detail, putting the points onto detail. In the first map, we have the sets and the states. But I've done them in the panes, the separate panes that have been created because there's now 2 axes. And now I can join the 2 views together in a dual axis simply enough by clicking here and going to dual axis. Awesome. So this is definitely getting a little bit closer to relating to your audience, right? Because now you can actually just pinpoint directly which hometown you're from, and then it will automatically select which district you're in. So for this last part, I want to use all of those like best practices and cool things that Robert has shown us, and some of the things that we've just showcased to put together a cohesive dashboard. So for now, I've moved our sheet onto a dashboard. And immediately, if you remember from the meter example, I see that our title is not that great. So instead of adding the title here, I'm actually just going to remove it and put my own title that I prepared. I made mine a little bit assertive, if you would. It's kind of attempting to say, it's about time you learn which district you're in. It's like sitting down with a friend trying to help you out. And this is what this is. That's what I want this to be. I want it to be like, I'm trying to help you out. Let me know what city you're from. I can give you some more information about your district. All right? And then one thing I want to do with this title is I want to use color to pinpoint some important words. So in this one, I think the word represents is the most important word within here because it really gives like a theme to the entire thing. It's about representation. So we're going to take represents, and I'm going to make it yellow. So it's one color with the rest of the viz, and I'm going to bold it. Awesome. Already starting to look a lot better. So what next? Well, what about that parameter control that we just made a little bit ago? Like, how do we insert this into the viz? First, let's show it. So I'm going to go here, go to our parameter, and select hometown. And we can leave it here, and it's very useful down here. But I want it to be part of the text. I want it to read like a story. So to do that, I'm going to, instead of making it fixed, we're going to make it floating and pull it onto the viz. And then because it's a text box, we can actually put it within other text. So here, I've prepared a I live in text field. And when I paste it, I can actually go and put this parameter control in here. And as always, we want it to make it type in. So now it reads like a sentence, right? I live in White Salmon, Washington, or I live in Seattle, Washington, which is actually where I'm from. Cool. So now it's starting to read like a story. It's like sitting you down with the title, and then it allows you to input yourself almost like those like Mad Libs games we played as children directly into here. Now, what if your viewer doesn't know anything about congressional districts or how the voting works? I think text is a great way to provide some context in general to what is going on overall. So here is more information about the voting system in the United States. I'm going to put in here. I'm using dashboard text objects because we're in a dashboard. Cool. So now whenever you're doing this, not only do you know what district approximately you are, but you also will learn a little bit more about the election process in general. And then finally, I want to put this nice city here just to re-emphasize which city you're from. That didn't work. Oh. So now that we have this, I think one thing that I really liked about Robert's first thing, is that he had this interaction text field to show you how to interact with the viz. And I want to duplicate this onto this dashboard as well, because how do you know to hover over this if you don't try it yourself? Let's make it super apparent. I have a little bit of description on how to use the viz. I'm going to drag that over here and paste it. And it says hover over the district to learn more. And then use the years filter below to explore elections over time. So we can include the years filter now. Again, we're going to make it sliding and floating. So single value slider. I'm going to remove the all value because in general we want to see the history, not overall. And then I'm going to make it floating. So now I can control it and put it below this text I just created. So now you can explore more information about what happened overall. All right. So, things do change whenever you go like this, but it's not too apparent. You have to still go in and hover over the map. So I want to introduce the concept of big numbers. And big numbers are essentially just large text objects that give you very quick information about the viz in general. So a good one, one thing I want to mention is that you can also drag in a cursor icon, just to be very apparent that you can hover over the viz. Just drag an image to the location you want. I'm going to choose this PNG file. And now you can see we have this nice big hand that draws your attention whenever you start viewing this. You probably would read the title, read a little bit over here, and then you see the big hand, and now you know, hey, it's time to hover over the viz and learn more. All right, so big text. One important thing is, probably finding out who represents you, because that's the name of the viz. So to do that, you can create a new sheet. I'm going to drop candidate directly on text. And what this does is just put out all of the candidates in text form. So the mark is just a text mark. And then I want to drag party onto color. So use the same color format over there. And we want to just pick the one that won in that particular district whenever your hometown is being selected. So I'm going to drag district onto filter, use that same formula that we did before. Max hometown equals city. Okay, now when I zoom out, you can see it's just the candidates within the current selected district. And then we want to just pick the one that won. So to do that, we're going to put candidate onto filter, go to top, and we just want the one that won. So the top one by candidate votes. Hit OK, and you see everything disappears. This is exactly what we didn't want. The main reason for this is because it's actually doing the top one filter before it does the district filter. So it's filtering to the one candidate who won the most, and then seeing if that candidate's in the selected district, and if it is, it keeps it. If it doesn't, it removes it. So it's actually in the wrong order. We want the top one in just the district, and that's actually very simple. So right now, the filter is executing candidate first and then district. We can move district ahead by making it a context filter by clicking this add to context. And now you see Kathy McMorris Rogers is the winner of this particular district. One last thing I want to do is ensure that the years filter is on here. Okay. All right, so one last thing to make sure it's big text, so we make it nice and big so everyone can read it nice and easily. So I can go to text, edit text, and there we go, nice and big. So when I go back to big text and I drag that new sheet we created, you can see that this is now a large text, and you immediately can see who is representing you. Let's say we change to Seattle, Washington. You see how it doesn't change. That's good. Okay. Also had to put year in context as well. And while I'm here, I'm going to format this so you don't have to see the background. So I went to shading, and then I just removed the default shading for this workbook. Okay, and when I go back to big text, you can see it updates correctly. Let's go to Walla Walla. And you see Kathy McRogers again. All right. So if you noted, so here I added some more big text. This is done exactly the same way that we just showed. You just put in all the values you want, and you start filtering by district and candidate, or whatever it is that your viz uses, just to show the value that you need. And then you can drag it on as a sheet, and it just fits into the view like this. So one thing to note is that over here, this is showing a legend with Republican on red, which makes sense. But legends take up a lot of space, and we have all this text already here, and we want to make sure there's more text and less, legends and filters and all these things. So one cool thing you can do is just in your text itself, use it as a legend. So I'm going to double click here, and I have the words Democrat and Republican already in this particular text view. So I can just change Republican to be red, change Democrat to be blue, and hit OK. There really is no need for a legend now because it's pretty clear that Republican is describing Kathy. And also whenever I hover here, it's also red and blue, so everything just matches really well, and there's no need for that ugly, sometimes ugly, legend over there. Cool. So I think that's really about it for this dashboard. Over here I added a nice little mini map, and if you're interested in how we build that, you can ask after. And this is how you can use all of those simple, basic tools that we introduced today, and some other ways of using parameters and such to create one cohesive view. That's actually, pretty attractive and pretty easy to use, very intuitive. My friend who lives in Vancouver, Washington, you can see that automatically changes, and all the values change to tell him that, he lives in Congressional District 3, and Jamie's representing them with a 62% victory over in 2014. All right. All right, so let's recap. So a focus viz is one that maximizes the subject and minimizes the background. I did this in the view by just putting a data source level filter on Washington, but you may have to remove other sheets that you've already created just to make sure your message gets out. And knowing your audience is super critical. Without knowing my audience is just my friends in Washington, it's really difficult to really pick out what information is absolutely necessary and what is just noise. And then finally, you really want to connect with your audience. Knowing that people do not think in terms of congressional districts, but rather think in terms of hometown allows me to make the entry point for my viz that much lower and makes it that much more interesting and engaging for my audience. Okay, back to you.
All right, thank you, Kelvin. So you've seen different ways of using text and context to make your visualizations easier to approach, easier to understand. And the next time you make a visualization about a giant meteor that's about to strike us, everybody will know what's happening. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for sticking around for this last and final session here. And if you have any questions, please come up to us. We'll be here for the next 10 minutes or so to answer any questions you have or to chat. And please don't forget to fill in the survey in the app as well. And pro tip, it's actually fastest if you just pick 5 stars for everything. So anyway, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.